And as soon as this was true, you could imagine that digitalized workflow. And that's true only if you can Legoify or make everything Lego.
I love the word Legoify. You've deeply understood the problem and the challenge, and you deliver it as an IKEA of a machine.
Businesses are not meant to exist. You fight against gravity so much, it's almost like inhumane.
The miscommunication between customer and us, and then internally between mechanical and electrical. I feel that pain every single day as a system integrator.
And I remember at the time some venture capitalist was looking at us and they were simply telling us, you guys do overpriced shelving, huh? Well, it's one mini step in a much bigger journey. And then General Electric became a very good client early on. Tesla came in, a few others came in. We're going towards a world where every machine will be connected.
So maybe I thought we could start with what is Vention and why did you go about creating it so many years ago?
I guess you have to go back to my very early career where I was actually a system integrator myself, working for one, and designing machine with a workflow that I would call very much traditional. We were going on large industrial distributor website, finding parts from great brands and vendors, quickly realizing that all those parts use standard but different one. So as the eager engineers and system integrators by all means are kind of expert in their field, and with all that expertise and that firepower, we were end up designing so many custom parts to make the vendor parts work with one another, harnesses, bracket frames, and so on. Eventually one colleague would program a PLC and I was probably manufacturing the parts, and we're coming back at the end to assemble those machines. And what ended up happening, it was pretty much a project, right? And with project means sometimes cost overrun, means delays. And our client as system integrators, we're not always happy. It's a very difficult business because there's a lot of gray zone. And being exposed to that problem firsthand, the idea of Vention popped around 2014, where we realized that it was possible to do engineering grade 3D in the browser. And as soon as this was true, you could imagine that digitalized workflow, where the environment where you ideate the machine and design the machine is also the environment where you buy the machine and get it delivered. And that's true only if you can Legoify or make everything Lego. And that idea popped around 2014. I think we got going a year and a half later in the summer of 2016 with that very unique go-to-market to make industrial automation less like a project, but more like a product, giving clients significantly more speed and ease of use than the more traditional approach.
I love the word Legoifying. Well, I mean, we're a system integrator and we try to create what we call building blocks, but essentially Lego blocks within our business. So we can have, let's say, 50% of the project, as you allude to, at least in standard blocks, and we try to put them together. But as you say, I 100% agree with you. I feel that pain every single day as a system integrator. The white spaces between the different vendors, right? And then the miscommunication between customer and us, and then internally between mechanical and electrical. There's always these unknowns, which is why we have project managers to try and get these things going.
And that's why system integrators do what you just described. They build deep expertise in certain processes, try to create their own Lego block to serve that piece of the market where they have knowledge, to have a little bit of scale and make sure they can, serve the client faster, better, exactly. We decided to do that for at a different level, more, at a agnostic of a process, like creating a platform, and it served usually entry level to mid-range use cases.
So obviously Vention is very much an end-to-end. So you have a CAD, design, bill of materials, purchasing, cutting of the extrusion, delivering of a lot of the automation stuff now, and you deliver it as an IKEA of a machine. At what stage did you realize that you need to connect all of these elements together? Because the easy part is to stop at, okay, the software, web interface to design, and you output a bill of materials and good luck. At what stage did you take it all the way? Because that's, I would imagine from a venture capital perspective, less interesting to a lot of venture capitalists because it's not SaaS completely.
I think the end goal was not about pleasing or not pleasing venture capitalists. The end goal was, how do you create the most value in that industry? How do you enable more business to automate, considering all the challenges that a lot of manufacturers are facing? And for us, that's where you have to be end to end, and you have to be hardware and software. And it's not a trivial decision, because it means there's tremendous amount of work to do. As you pointed out, Yanesh, today Vincian has kind of, we call this the four pillar, but the design pillar, where you design with those Lego bricks or industrial Lego parts, the automate pillar, where you program and simulate your machine, whether it's in code free or in Python, the order and deploy, where you get this kind of IKEA box or IKEA pallet with your own assembly instruction part. And that means we have distribution centers across the globe to serve the clients. And last but not least, the operate pillar, which means you have some level of analytics, remote support, teleoperation of those cells. It's a big endeavor. And coupled with that is roughly 2.5 thousand Lego parts. Around 2,000 are Vention parts. We've created hardware with the sole purpose of injecting it into that software flow. So the experience is really seamless.
How did Etienne get into this? Like, what is the journey to you getting this thought or feeling the pain to be able to say, I got to solve this problem?
I feel my story is not very different than your own story. Passion for engineering and industrial technology for me arise at a very, very young age. I think around 11 years old, I had already I was designing, and I had built a full size plane in my backyard, and I'd taken the lawnmower engine from my dad and modified a carburetor so the shaft could work horizontally without the air and oil mix getting squeezed in. I was very mechanically minded, and around 15, 16 years old, mountain bike was starting to be cool with suspension and disc brake and carbon fiber. So I started to design downhill bikes back then. And that led to roughly 19 years old, landing my first job as a system integrator, managing a small engineering department. And that's where I really got exposed to industrial technology, robots, assembly lines, heavy manufacturing processes. And I discovered something that I didn't know existed, and I just, it was fulfilling lifelong passion. Product development in those environments to me was what was keeping me up at night. And this was coupled with a deep passion for anything 3D CAD software. Back then, it wasn't, you're in 98, 99, pretty much all the CAD software at the time were installed on my computers. And you go back where yeah, mechanical desktop was a thing. Inventor, Autodesk Inventor was not even released yet. Right? You had AutoCAD, a little bit
Yeah.
3D and AutoCAD with Boolean operations. SolidWorks was starting to make some headway. Pro Engineers was slowly turning, Pro Engineer PTC Creo now was slightly starting to lose market share. Kitsia was going big in aerospace with the A380 and the 787. There's all those design software, and I knew them all inside out. I spent so much time designing machines and various products on those. I was really, really passionate about that. So it's really that intersection, that initial pool of knowledge and experience that I accumulated probably until I was 23, 24, that gave me all the package to be able to come up with the idea around, I was probably 30 years old, 6, 7 years later, to go solve this. And interestingly, when I had the idea, I was no longer in that industry. I was on what I like to say the dark side of management consulting, serving engineering intensive businesses, very often manufacturers, on various product development topics. I was not far, but I was not designing myself, nor I was doing system integration. But the technology became good enough around that 2014 years, and that's where I said, well, all the work I've done previously, I could have done it at a fraction of the time if I'm able to stitch that workflow. And it was a big endeavor, as I said, but so it's really it's a lifelong learning that, crystallize or condense itself to the spark moment in 2014.
What gave you the courage to try something that's never been tried before?
It took me a year and a half to, what I like to say, rewire my brain. At the time, and all of us are often stuck into this, I was earning well my career, had no financial, consideration to really think about. I just had a new daughter. My first daughter. She was barely 6 months old, and the act of jumping and leaving your job, your your RRSP or your 401A, you're leaving your all that security. It takes a little bit of a leap of faith, and I know I was going to a world where I had no income for I don't know how long, right? And it took me a while to rewire my brain, and my basically I decided to put saving for 2 years of life. I had so I could take care of everybody of my family and so on for 2 years, and I put a little bit of money in the venture bank account. I said, well, if I'm in six months, if I cannot get funded, I'll go get a real job. And I jumped in, and we got funded pretty early within 3 months, and we were able to get going. But it takes a pretty big leap of faith, and I think you need to be a little bit naive almost to do that. The likelihood of this working is incredibly low, and it takes a bit of luck and definitely a decent amount of hard work. I very often use the analogy of the Apple iTunes and the iTunes store and the iPod, sorry. And when I was a teenager, I'm sure you remember that, but music was free, right? You could go on,
Yep.
on any torrent website, download a big discography of an artist you like, and burn it down to CDs, and here you go, right? And at the time, I could consume digital music, but my parents certainly could not. It was just too complex, too convoluted as a workflow. And that changed when Apple came up with the iTunes Store and the iPod, where suddenly there was so much ease of use by bringing hardware and software together, and everybody shifted like that to digital music, went from free to paying $1 a song. Right? It was so when you combine hardware and software, you can create user experience that are so simple that could not compete with the software only user experience. And if the true mission is not to please VC, but to empower manufacturers to automate, I think you need to cover both sides. So the reason we were able to do it so far without breaking our neck, because it's a big endeavor, is because we started this journey serving small medium businesses. And small medium businesses, their next best alternative is either to automate or to hire Johnny and Lewis, and so their requirements are a little bit lower. They're as long as they get a benefit versus the next best offer. They were very early adopter, and we've worked with them to build the platform over the years. If I had started Vention trying to serve already a manufacturing end of line for a car assembly factory, I would never be able to get there. There's just too much requirement, too much
Right.
level of performance to get that day zero, right? There's a lot of technology to build. So we start to serve small, medium businesses. We went broad, and now that we've assembled the workflow, we work with our client to push the frontiers where it matters the most to them.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting approach about understanding the broader future vision, but starting with quick wins, as you kind of describe, right? That allows you to build towards the grand vision of maybe automotive production lines one day, right?
I think to take the approach we took, you need a lot of humility. Because if you remember well, Yanesh, I go back to 2016, 2017, we started mostly with a very reduced catalog of Lego parts. I think we had 70, mostly centered around an extrusion kit and the machine builder software. And I remember at the time, some venture capitalists was looking at us, and they were simply telling us, you guys do overpriced shelving, huh? And this is, well, it's one mini step in a much bigger journey, but you have to start somewhere, and
Yeah.
it needed some humility to go back to that kind of more basic kit, but that is still foundational to the rest that we're building today.
I think it's really amazing because you look at what you've achieved now, and it would have been very difficult to try and achieve what you've achieved now right at the beginning. So you kind of had to take it step by step, and as you say, be humble, and gradually get that. That's pretty amazing. I mean, I first heard about Vention 3 or 4 years ago. It was in the middle of COVID, I think, at some point. And I see the progression of what you're at that stage. I think you were releasing the automation controller at the early stages of that. And now I see it's a full-fledged product, and you can do simulations online of your machine moving around and doing what it must do. And 3 or 4 years ago, that didn't exist. So that's pretty cool. Like you say, a deliberate step-by-step approach to this very complex end-to-end
Yeah, and we've did a
solution.
lot of work so far, but I still feel that to serve our client well, we have more work ahead than behind. Right? There's still a decent amount of work to solve what we're trying to solve, making automation more accessible to more manufacturers. But this is such of a relevant problem for so many businesses across the whole world right now.
You've deeply understood the problem and the challenge. And with technology, there's different whatever tools in your toolbox to solve the problem in different ways. But you got to have um, a, a deep understanding of the problem that you're trying to solve, and there's many ways to solve it. And I think that's what I find very interesting, and why I related a lot when I first came across Vention, because it was like touching a nerve, you know. Because it's a problem I experience almost every day of my life as a system integrator. What was your first paying customer? What did they buy?
Actually, the first customer as our very first generation of machine motion. It's a very unique SKU. This company was in the business of scanning blueprint for aerospace company. So let's say you have an old aircraft design. Everything was done with almost manual drawings or blue ink jet brine, and they
Yeah.
were in the business of digitalizing those things. So it was basically a machine that brings the drawing over, adjusts a very expensive camera up and down to digitalize the whole thing. And so it was a little bit of automation. And the machine is still running today. It's a company called Trigonix, not far away from our initial office in Montreal. And what's interesting about this client is the controller they have was actually the case interview of my CTO today. So when my CTO joined the business as employee number four, I told him, let's say you have around 3 months to design a plug and play motion controller. No gray enclosure, just plug and play out of the box motion controllers where there's no pigtail wires, no terminal block, everything. How would you go about it? And that was his case interview and come up with schematics and a rough design and says, I will need roughly 4 months to do it, and something like that. This is great, you're hired when you only have 2 months because it's already sold. And we yeah, and I do believe we delivered maybe 2 3 weeks late that machine. The machine's still running. It's now 8 years old. It's scanning blueprint, and we're very proud of it. And then General Electric became a very good client early on, and a few others added up. Tesla came in, a few others came in, and we're very lucky to work with roughly 4,000 factories today over those years.
Would you be able to describe the most complex machine that has been developed on your platform by some other integrator?
It's funny, the best one we can never talk about because they're confidentials, but sometimes there's one we can shine a little bit of
Okay.
light. There's one actually on a case study we did with a company earlier this year called The Feed. And there's this online marketplace for food for athlete. They do, they sell online protein powders and nutritional bar. And they came at us early February this year and asking us, listen, we need like full automated bin retrieval packaging station for a warehouse that ship roughly 5,000 order a day. And this is the problem is we've won a sponsorship
Yeah.
for Tour de France and we need to be ready by end of April. Says, okay, wow, that's like you have 3 months to design, deploy, commission, and ramp up, right? Those systems. And we actually did it with them. We worked with them. We went to their factories. So it was a high touch project. We were involved, but leverage the entirety of the Lego bricks that we provide our users in the platform. And it's a beautiful machine that is feeding roughly five automated picking station and with a lot of conveyors logic. I think there's 8 machine motion controllers working in unison. It's a nice
Wow.
piece of equipment, but what's most astonishing is the speed we were able to do it. Right from the ideation to the deployment is roughly 8 weeks. It helped free up 15 labor position that were reassigned to something else. And this talking with the CEOs, he was telling us, you guys were not 2 to 3 times faster. You guys mean you were 6 to 8 times faster because we were able to Legoify the entire design so quickly. I think this one is a very first, very interesting one. But there's so many people trying to do automated car inspection with robots and big entry system. We have a client that is manufacturing electrical breakers with a full-fledged assembly lines. Folks manufacturing avionics system again with semi-automated or fully automated assembly line. We've seen so it's around 4,000 machine per year that we have the privilege to see. They're all a little bit different because well, Yanesh, manufacturing problems come in all flavors. Everybody has different manufacturing
Yeah.
strategy. Everybody has different finished good, and there's always some level of customization needed to really suit that intersection.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And you say 8 weeks.
It was 8 weeks from ideation to deployment and ramp up. Yeah, yeah. And it's not because we
And
work faster or longer hours. It's just because the power of the platform. When we work with building blocks, hardware and software building blocks, you can just achieve speed that is really different or harder to achieve when you work with traditional tool, right? One CAD software, one PLC software, one robot software, sometimes another software for the conveyor, sometimes another software for the safety. It's getting really hard to have a workflow that goes fast from one end to the other. When you bring everything back to the same environment, you just get a structural speed advantage.
how close did you do the software development of the machine on the platform as well?
I have a great co-founders who was extremely involved in building what we call our software stack or offering. But as a power user of CAD software myself, and I know pretty much every algorithm inside our machine builder software and how we present the new part to the user, how we recommend part to the users. There's a lot of layers of logic where we always have to bring the domain expertise, like this expertise that machine designer know well, with what's possible from a technology perspective, right, and marry those two to create value for the end user, I guess.
But did you, for example, the actual software to make the machine move, the motion controller stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really the today. There's such of a divide between where you design, where you program PLC, where you program robot. They're kind of three disjointed environment. And it should really be the same and unique thing. And when we talk about use case like the feed, we're able to do everything in the same place. And not only that 3D environment where we design, where we program, is also where we purchase, right? Where the client buys their Lego parts. It just makes again this digitalization save a lot of time.
And also, it allows you to do parallel work. So while something is in manufacturing, you're actually programming it. Then eventually, when the physical equipment connects to the platform again, you've at least programmed 90%
It gets
of the
you
machine.
there almost like 90% of what you would need to do. You can now do in the cloud, and there's still a little bit of
Yeah.
edge work remaining, and hopefully in a couple of years we'll be able to remove the remaining edge part, and we've virtualized machine design entirely. And I think this will open the doors to many different things in that industry when we're done virtualizing the entire workflow.
What's your take on AI? Where does AI fit in manufacturing as a whole, and then specifically Vention?
I think my perspective evolved a little bit, Yanesh, over I would say the last 18 months. When I started Vention, I had a very clear understanding of every piece of technology that we had to internalize in the user experience to create a great end-to-end workflow. And AI arrived, it kind of make where's the frontier now a little bit more blurry for me. And I had to read quite a bit. I don't think I've read as much research paper that I've read this year to understand how people are pushing the frontiers. The way I would describe the industry today, it's almost there's kind of two strategy where companies are trying to bring AI to their clients to create value. One, there's a few folks trying to crack artificial general intelligence (AGI), and I think it's a very high risk, high reward mission. It's a little bit different than the Chat GPT to me because Chat GPT had no distribution problems. Everybody has a web browser. If you do AGI for robotics, you need to be embedded in hardware. So the act of
Yeah.
distribution is much more complex, and you couple that with the technology being so early that it's hard to know if you're betting on the right model. And we've seen some startup already trying to go after this, build those foundational model for robotics, and they betted on the wrong technology. And as a result, those business have already disappeared because you spend hundreds of millions training some sort of AI model. You realize that there's a slightly better way to build those AI model, and all that asset that you've built is suddenly worthless. And the way VC works, they're unlikely to fund you for the next discovery. So those business are over. I think there's a more prudent way to think about AI that creates more value for manufacturers in a much more short term, which and I call that the best of breed AI model. There's a lot of people publishing AI model today for robotics. Facebook, Nvidia, Samsung, all great university that have a good robotics programs are publishing models. And we're on forum today, and there's literally every 2 months there's a model beating the previous models. And a lot of the models arriving today are already pre-trained. So it's a very bubbling space. It goes quickly. And I think there's work to be done where you take the best of breed of those models, let's say for grasping or for pose estimation or for image segmentation, bring them to a proper tech stack, right? Make them industrial grade, more robust, so they're less error prone, and present them or give them access to the end user. And I think to me this is a much safer, quicker way to provide value. Everybody is walking towards autonomous robotics, but you don't need AGI today to create value with autonomous robotics. AGI might take another 5 to 10 years, but there's AI model today that are ready to create value. Pose estimation, GPU accelerated path planning, you're ready to create value today when you bring them into the proper ecosystem.
And where's the, if I understood correctly, what you're suggesting is that within Vention, you'll try to build the right tech stack to still solve the customer problem at the end of the day, both as the engineer designing the machine and also the end user using the machine.
We really, really care about the end user. And if we can make, if AI can be used to make programming of those machines significantly more abstracted or simpler, that's going to be everybody's going to win. The example that I often tell the team, or we always debate, if you want to grab that cup of coffee and you're a robot and there's a wall in between, today you will have to program all those approach point and the pick point and orient the robot out. You're going to have to program this in a very prescriptive fashion. Well, today there's AI libraries where you can just say, if you see a coffee, go grab it. And by the way, if there's object between the flow, just don't collide with them. And the robot will self-program towards a mission. Grab the coffee if I see one, and he will decide if I grab this way or if I grab this way. All of this is already abstracted from, so it gets much easier for the users to input the mission or the task they're trying to do. So you don't need to be an expert in robotics and know all the stuff you need to know today in this new world. And I think we're a couple, before this goes from demo to like commonality on manufacturing floor, we're probably a couple of years away, but some of the technologies start to be mature enough to start embedding them into end products.
I think there's already a lot. If you just look at computer vision, precise pick points, feel within a gripper, there's already enough to start having impact on AI. Forget about AGI and like autonomous robots. There's already stuff that's having a big impact. Sort of a slightly left field question, if you don't mind. So you're obviously out of Canada, and what I found, so we're based in South Africa. We have a factory in South Africa. We have a factory in India. So we're fortunate to have customers across the globe in Europe, in North America, as well as obviously in developing countries. And there's a very different perception around what the future should be for manufacturing. So from the West perspective, you have this idea of we got to go full autonomous. There's a lack of skills, lack of people. It's too expensive to employ an operator, etc. So there's a big drive to automate. I mean, it's the key driver around collaborative robots. Although I don't think collaborative robots are collaborative, they're just easier robots to program. That's a topic for another day. However, if you look at the developing world, which if you just forecast into the next sort of 10 to 15 years will be 60 to 70% of the global population, many of which would be unemployed. Um, so I would love to get your opinion on the opportunities for Vention in both places, because I think if I look at Vention as what I understand your motto to be, is to reduce the skills to be able to deliver something. And given the fact that we've got reduced skills, but many people, maybe we could have a lot of, let's say, machine designers sitting on a Vention platform that's able to deliver automation solutions or non-automation solutions to different environments. I'd love to get, if you have a perspective on different sort of environments.
So we're a little bit less exposed to India, and having spent several months traveling India for a client in my previous life, I know that the product needed to serve Indian customers are likely to be a little bit different than the products to serve the American manufacturers. In America, the need for and in Europe in general, the need for labor shortage is very structural. It's very much needed, and it's structural. And some of the policies being considered by the new American administration could even amplify that a little bit from an immigration perspective and from a tariff perspective. Those things are likely to make labor scarcity even more difficult, and automation will be the key there. So I think there's a long way to go in the world, in America, in Europe, to help customer automate some of the factory you already have today. From a venture management perspective, um, we feel that this is already such of a big endeavors that we want to stay focused, and knowing again the specificities of how we would have to go to market and create value in India, for example, would be very different than what we do in North America. It will be different type of equipment, different type of experience, different type of of approach to reach customer as well there and manufacturers.
Yeah, for sure, the environment is very difficult, but I certainly think there's opportunity for a Vention type of solution.
Even though we're not physically present in India and other countries, we're technically present on two continents, like Western Europe and North America. But we've been serving
Yeah.
so many manufacturers in Middle East, in Japan, in Southeast Asia, in South America, as you know, and so many other places as well, where we found pockets of excellence where we can create value, and we were able to
Yeah.
develop great relationship with some people there over the years. Yeah.
But I do agree with you in that there's already enough to focus on. It's probably better to not spread yourself too thin and master one segment before you start spreading your wings, right? I think that's an important thing to understand. What do you think has been your biggest challenge?
To create the user experience we're trying to create, it's incredibly difficult because one brain needs to integrate all the aspect of that user experience, from the act of selecting parts online to designing in a in a 3D CAD that has all sorts of algorithm, to being able to program those machines and deploy them and eventually operate them. There's so many little details that if you think about each of those things in silos, the tech will work, but the user experience will not work. And to solve user experience across all those pieces of workflow, somebody needs to do, I like to say, the violence of integrating everything in their own brain. And a lot of people are willing to do that. And I think that's where I had underestimated, and I can absorb a lot of things, but I'm still not done internalizing the entire workflow in my own brain. And sometimes I go test our own product, and I wish, if we had thought about it this way, if we had thought about this implication that's happening 3 steps earlier, we could have made step 6 so much more delightful, right? And it's hard to bring that very broad consideration list in everyone's brain. So when we problem solve to create those user experience, we think of this really holistically. I think that's what has been the hardest. It's a pretty hard workflow to digitalize end to end. Yeah. And that's what gives me,
Yeah.
you're trying to do that and we're relatively small businesses, or we're only 300 and something employees. It's easy to talk to one another, to be in the same room, to problem solve. Imagine trying to solve this when you're a large company. It would be impossible. You need to do that entire workflow mapping and user experience design when you're small.
And I also think that embedding in a culture of continuous improvement and being okay with criticism is important. Because as you get bigger, those are the fundamental things that everyone needs to accept. You know, that innate ability to want to always be better and be critical about the past so that you can be better.
Yanesh, I agree holistically with you here. I think this is good for every business. Being open to, continuous feedback and improvement and put the ego out of the way is the only way to me to build a business quickly. I just absorb the feedback. If there's feedback given, there's a reason it was given, and try to use that feedback to make the product experience better, the customer service better, whatever aspect of the business the feedback is related to. But there's no time for ego when you build your business.
I'm pretty sensitive to that because we've also grown our business. We're now
It's massive.
850 people, and I find that people get defensive. They've taken a decision to go a certain way on a product, and when people are critical of that, they get defensive. Or if the customer didn't use it the way it was expected, it's the customer's fault. And when we were a smaller organization, that was never the case. It was never the case. We were always sensitive, and egos weren't in place. But I think as you grow, it's very difficult to propagate that culture to everyone.
I know, and it's to propagate it across cultural contexts, across different working team, and different function that all have their own working habit is a very hard challenge. But I think it's entirely worth it for the organization.
We've got a couple of minutes left. What's the future look like for Vention? Like if I said, here, Etienne, here's the magic wand, wave it. What would you love to see in the next couple of years?
There's more work and more impact to create in the future than what we had so far. And the world is just starting to automate, in my opinion. We're at the beginning of the robotic adoption curve. So there's just so much to build. Earlier in the conversation today, I said we went broad before going deep. Now that we have the breadth, we're going for depth. So a lot of the announcement and the news you'll hear from us in this coming year in 2025 will be related to depth, right? We're going deeper in certain vertical where our client told us we're missing this tool or this tool to be able to leverage your full workflow that you're proposing us. So we're investing a lot of this. A lot of those translate into features around robotics and automation to make the digital twin a more relevant tool. Right? If you can really de-risk your entire machine in the virtual world, the deployment becomes a breeze, and it becomes so it's almost about shifting the risk profile of those projects from a deployment side today when you're finally assembling the machine and start to test and you realize that it's working but not exactly the way you want it, so you inject significantly more engineering hours there. If we're able to shift that piece of work back to the virtual world, I think it's going to be very, very good for small medium businesses because they're more risk averse than large enterprise, right? Their funds are scarce. So when they invest, it needs to work. And they cannot take on an investment knowing that, we might end up having to double it as we deploy. They really need that certainty up front. So we need to make the digital twin very, very relevant. And I think there's a decent amount that we do already, but there's so much more we could be doing to help our clients.
Any vision of having that machine that you've designed, manufactured, programmed, integrate back into the system for data analysis and sort of SCADA type, cloud-based SCADA?
We offer very, an early infrastructure here with machine analytics where our clients can connect to their equipment and obviously track the process performance but I would say it's a product geared towards small businesses, small medium businesses. I think there's so much more to be done in that field and integrate with the big MES or SCADA platform here. There's little announcement I'm going to make in this field this year, but I don't think this is the year where we will move the needle just yet. But yes, we're going towards a world where every machine will be connected. Just for the sake amount of remote support, predictive analytics, and maintenance, those machine needs to be connected somehow. And we will see more and more of that as also the cybersecurity standards are evolving. And that will bring the value created at the SCADA or MES layer even more relevant.
I listened to one of your previous podcasts somewhere in preparation for this a couple of days ago, and you mentioned that this kind of business is not necessarily for everyone, which I agree with, by the way. What did you mean by that? Because I think it's an important lesson. What looks often rosy on LinkedIn and the internet, social media, is not necessarily rosy and requires a lot more under the surface than what the internet puts out there.
Businesses are not meant to exist. You fight against gravity so much to lift something off the ground that it's almost like inhumane the amount of energy and that you need to inject into them. And to your point, a couple of years ago, it was kind of appealing or sexy to be in startup, and leaving the glamour life of it. But the reality is, it's all about grind. And nobody does strategy in a startup, or everybody does strategy, but the real work is executions. Idea are cheap. So if you're not wired to have extremely strong work ethic, there's less structure than a rapidly growing business than a highly matured one. So you need not only to have that resilience, but you need to be able to cope with some level of structure chaos. And if you're not wired to gain energy from those environments, you're not going to last long, right? And there's plenty of businesses that offer great work-life balance, and if that's what you really want for your career, you should go apply to those. If you want to build and create legacy, it's not going to happen though in large business. You need to join a startup, roll up your sleeve, and contribute, and that's where I often say it's not for everybody. And like the Olympics is not for everybody, right? Not I could not be an Olympic athlete. Not everybody should be in startup either.
I agree. I think it's so I think you got to have enough of a passion for something to keep you going through the tough times, because the tough time is coming, and it's that passion that allows you to at least keep going, and grit is all of it, grit and passion. And I tell people, and I say this because I've had the experience. If you're not able to handle the scenario where you've got zero in the bank account, in fact minus X millions in the bank account, and you don't have a cent for salaries, and you got to go and face your team, if you're not ready for that, then maybe this is not for you, because that can happen, and it's often happens to a lot of businesses a lot of the time. And so you got to have the stomach to handle all of that. And for me, it comes down to the passion for wanting to make it work. And it's, I've had far too many scenarios where I'm like, oh my goodness, how are we going to do that? And you got to face your staff, face your customers when things are
Could
going
not
bad.
agree more.
Etienne, I know that you said you had a hard stop in 4 minutes, so I didn't want to let you rush to your next appointment. Lastly, thank you very much for your time. I've watched your journey from the outside. It's a real honor to have you inside on the podcast. And I think you're changing the game.
Thank you very much for the kind words, and we're looking forward to continue to collaborate with you guys and make more customers able to automate.
Yeah, thank you very much. I
Thank
appreciate
you so
it.
much for having us today.